The Israeli Defense Forces, or IDF, has withdrawn its troops from Jenin in the occupied West Bank, ending an intense two-day operation that killed at least 13 Palestinians, drove thousands from their homes and left a trail of destruction in its wake. One Israeli soldier was also killed. The Israeli army claims to have inflicted heavy damage on militant groups in the Jenin refugee camp in an operation that included a series of airstrikes and hundreds of ground troops. This comes after nearly a year and a half of heavy fighting in the West Bank. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed to carry out similar operations again if needed, saying we'll eradicate terrorism whenever and wherever we see it, we will strike at it. The Jenin raid was one of the most intense Israeli military operations in the West Bank since an armed Palestinian uprising against Israel's open-ended occupation ended 2 decades ago. Since early 2022, Israel has been carrying out near-daily raids in the West Bank in response to a series of deadly Palestinian attacks. It says the raids are meant to crack down on Palestinian militants and necessary as the Palestinian Authority is too weak. Palestinians say such violence is the inevitable result of 56 years of occupation and the absence of any political process with Israel. They also point to increased West Bank settlement construction and violence by extremist settlers. As the military operation began on Monday, big military bulldozers tore through alleyways, leaving heavy damage to roads and buildings, and thousands of residents fled the camp, seeking safety. Electricity and water were knocked out. The army said the bulldozers were necessary because roads were booby-trapped with explosives. As the troops left, streets were lined by scorched and flattened cars and piles of rubble. The Israeli military says it has confiscated thousands of weapons, bomb-making materials and caches of money. Weapons were found in militant hideouts and civilian areas, in one case beneath a mosque, according to Israel. The withdrawal came hours after a Hamas militant rammed his car into a crowded Tel Aviv bus stop and began stabbing people, wounding 8, including a pregnant woman who reportedly lost her baby. The attacker was killed by an armed bystander. Hamas said the attack was revenge for the Israeli offensive. Militants from Hamas-ruled Gaza also fired 5 rockets towards Israel, which Israel says were intercepted. Israeli jets then struck several sites in Gaza. The year-long spike in violence between the two sides had created a challenge for Benjamin Netanyahu's far-right government, which is dominated by ultra-nationalists who've called for tougher action against Palestinians, only to see the fighting worsen. Over 140 Palestinians have been killed this year in the West Bank, and Palestinian attacks targeting Israelis have killed at least 25. The violence has raised warnings from humanitarian groups of a deteriorating situation. Israel's operation in Jenin has drawn sharp reactions. The Palestinian Authority has described it as a war crime. The UN's human rights chief has said the scale of the operation raises a host of serious issues with respect to international human rights norms, including protecting and respecting the right to life. Israel captured the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip in the 1967 Mid-East War. The Palestinians seek those territories for an independent state that they have been fighting for. The roots of violence and hatred between the two sides emanate from a conflict over possession of the land that began more than a century ago. For a while, back in the 1990s, there was hope that peace might come if an independent Palestinian state could be established alongside Israel, referred to as the two-state solution. The attempt failed. Powerful Western countries, including the United States, European Union members, and the United Kingdom, still insist that 2 states are the only possible solution. The last American attempt to try to make the idea work collapsed in 2014. And now there's a real danger that Israelis and Palestinians are sliding into an even more violent phase of their long conflict.
Of course, we support Israel's right to self-defense and have condemned the recent terrorist attacks. We would say that the protection of civilians must be prioritized in any military operation, and would urge the IDF to demonstrate restraint in its operation and for all parties to avoid further escalation in both the West Bank and Gaza, both now and in the days ahead, and also call on Israel to adhere to principles of necessity and proportionality when defending their legitimate security interests.
Whoever thinks that such an attack will deter us from continuing our fight against terrorism is wrong. They simply do not know the spirit of the state of Israel. They do not know our government, our citizens, or our fighters. I congratulate our brave fighters who destroyed many terrorist infrastructures in Jenin and thus prevented many attacks.